Welcome to Cat Has Questions, curiosity, stories in the strange corners of everyday life. Hello, and welcome to episode 1 of Cat Has Questions. I'm your host, Cat. So if you're here, first of all, thank you. I've always loved podcasts, especially true crime. My favorite murder, Crime Junkie, So Supernatural, the ones that make you, double check your locks at night. But I also love comedy podcasts, so like Amy Poehler's Good Hang, where you feel like you're just hanging out with your funny friends. Basically, I love anything that mixes curiosity and weirdness and a good story. So I thought, why not make something that's a mix of all the things I love? Weird stories, mysteries, bizarre medical cases, strange history, the occasional murder. Just cozy, comforting bedtime stories. And the name, Cat Has Questions, honestly came from a running joke among my friends and my family. I've always been a chronic out loud thinker and a constant question asker. So, for example, I went on a road trip a few years back with my sister Abby, who I tried to get to do a podcast with me, but she wouldn't. So I'll have to see if I can get her to come on here. So her husband, my husband, and one of my good friends, also named Abby, who we lovingly call A2 for clarity purposes. So A2 didn't know us super well yet, know me super well. And she was so confused because anytime I started talking in the car, the people who knew me just didn't answer. So they were used to me thinking out loud, firing off questions and comments. A2 finally was like, so why is no one answering her? And everyone else was basically like, oh, yeah, no, we just let her talk, let her wear herself out. So yes, I have questions, comments, concerns, many of them all the time. And that's what this podcast is. All my thoughts can go here now instead of to the group chat. So every episode, I'm going to dive into a story that grabbed my attention. Sometimes true crime, sometimes a strange medical case, sometimes a weird little piece of history. Anything that makes me go, I'm sorry, what? And that's basically the vibe here. So with that, let's get started with episode 1. So today we are talking about a man named Phineas Gage. And if that name rings even the tiniest bell, you probably took Psych 101 at some point. He's kind of the OG medical mystery. Honestly, he's one of those people where you're like, how did you walk away from that? My main sources for this article are from Britannica, written by Shannon Gearhart, and a piece from Very Well Mind by Kendra Cherry. Both super helpful, and both had me going, wait, what? Out loud while reading. All right, so let's start at the beginning. Phineas Gage was born July 1823 in New Hampshire. He worked as a railroad foreman, and honestly, by all descriptions, he was the guy you'd want running a team. Smart, hardworking, totally on it. And then came the accident. So, on September 13th, 1840, Gage was working with his crew in Vermont, using an iron tamping rod to pack explosive powder into a hole. Very normal railroad stuff, until it wasn't. The powder detonated unexpectedly and launched his tamping rod, which was 43 inches long and over an inch thick, straight upward through his left cheek, behind his eye, and through his brain, and out the top of his skull. And because I have zero spatial math ability, in my head, 1.25 inches is like a little smaller than a ping pong ball, somewhere between a golf ball and a tennis ball. I don't know. Either way, absolutely enormous, not something you want flying at your face at rocket speed. And it didn't stay in his head. I know that that's a rumor, or, that's something that's been told before, but it shot out of his skull and landed about 80 feet away from him like some horrible Olympic javelin event. Now, here's the part that makes literally no sense. Phineas Gage did not die. He did not even pass out. He was conscious the whole time. He was talking. He literally walked to a cart to be taken to a doctor. Imagine being a doctor on call and someone casually strolls in like, hey, so a metal spear flew through my head today. That night, he was still chatting, still remembering names, still overall present, which is wild because most people in this situation would not be alive, let alone reciting their coworkers' names. So he wasn't totally fine, though. He eventually developed an infection and went into a semi-comatose state for about 10 days. But by October, less than a month after the accident, he was back on his feet. Dr. John Harlow, the physician who followed Gage's case the longest, wrote that Gage lost vision in one eye and obviously had some gnarly scarring, but physically, he recovered way better than anyone should after a brain skewer experience. Before the accident, Gage was described as sharp, responsible, motivated. Afterward, friends said he basically became a different person. Irritable, impulsive, struggled with planning, lost a lot of what we would call social filters. It's like the part of the brain that says, maybe we don't say that out loud. That was gone. And that's exactly why his case became such a huge deal. It showed that the frontal lobe is involved in personality, decision-making, emotional control, all that stuff we just thought that's just who you are, that's your personality. So the theories as to why he survived. The first being the rod's exact path. If it had hit certain structures like blood vessels, that would have caused massive bleeding. He'd be done. So the rod somehow found a path that was catastrophic but not instantly fatal. The second theory is brain rewiring. A recent study on someone called the modern-day Phineas Gage, which how are there multiple of these cases? I didn't know anything about this one, so I'll have to look into it. Suggested that the brain can recruit other areas to take over when parts get damaged. The third theory as to why he survived is Gage's work structure. So some believe the routine and physical demands of his work helped him recover neurologically in ways we didn't understand at that time in the 1800s. So how bad was the damage really? We don't have MRI scans from 1848, obviously, so researchers tried reconstructing the injury later. A 1994 neuroimaging study showed damage to both frontal lobes. A 2004 3D reconstruction argued it might have been mostly the left frontal lobe. A 2012 study estimated a loss of about 11% of the white matter in the frontal lobe and 4% of his cortex. Basically, we know the general area, but not the exact boundaries. But whatever parts control impulse regulation and emotional processing, yeah, that got hit. Some researchers now think reports of his behavior change may have been exaggerated. Victorian era gossip was wild back then, but he definitely wasn't the same person afterward. So why does this case matter? Before Gage, nobody really knew which parts of the brain did what. His case was the first major evidence that certain brain functions are localized, that your personality isn't just floating around in your body, it lives in a very specific place in your brain. What happened to him afterward? He couldn't continue his old job, but he also didn't just want to sit around. He literally toured with his tamping rod. Just imagine that visual. He worked at a stable, then he spent 7 years as a stagecoach driver in Chile, which actually requires a lot of planning and multitasking. So again, more functional than people sometimes say. Eventually, he moved to San Francisco with his mom as his health declined. He died in 1860 from a series of seizures. This was about 12 years after the accident. And here's the wild ending. 7 years after he died, his family exhumed his body, gave his skull and tamping rod to Dr. Harlow, and they ended up at Harvard Medical School. And that is where they still live today. So that is what I have for episode 1 of Cat Has Questions. Email me if you have any interesting stories that you want me to know, or if I'm getting stuff wrong, which I know I am. I'm not a historian, so please send me an email at cathasquestionspod@gmail.com. Maybe if you have a great story or article, it could get featured on one of my upcoming episodes. Thanks for listening to Cat Has Questions. If you liked this episode, follow the show and share it with someone who loves a good spiral. See you next week.